software engineer and test at GitLab. I have been bouncing back and forth between testing and operations for over 20 years. So I've been bouncing back and forth between ops and testing for 20 plus years. So I've been championing DevOps principles since well before the term was even coined. So I'm going to be talking about using test automation to enhance observability. Where this started was, there was a time where I was working as a tester at a startup. It was a fairly small team, 2 testers, 7 developers, and 1 ops person. We were building and maintaining an application that had the equivalent of several million people sending tweets to it every 5 minutes. So it was we were basically DOSing ourselves every 5 minutes. We had a target of 99% uptime, mostly because if we failed that, we would fall behind and never catch up. We also had the requirement that no story was done unless it was tested and automated. So we were generating up a large number of automated tests. We actually had more lines of test code than application code. So with so few resources, so few people, I started trying to think about, okay, how can I maximize the value that we're adding to the product? And since we're generating all these automated tests, can we increase the value add of these tests that we're adding? You gain value from the test every time it's run, and you learn something. If you just run it a whole bunch of times and don't learn anything new, that's wasted effort. So I started looking into ways that I could increase the value we got from every run of our tests. First step, okay, we're running them in just our test environment. Well, let's see if we can run it in our staging and our production environment. That's great and good. But they still, over time, fall down to the regression path and don't really provide that much value after that. So then I started looking at our observability tools. And I'm going to go through a quick overview of a way I look at observability, and I know Henrik is going to wince at my definitions, but what is observability? From Wikipedia, observability is the ability to collect data about program execution, internal states, modules, and communication between components. Honeycomb says observability is the ability to fully understand our systems. In control theory, observability is the measure to how well internal states of a system can be measured from the external. To me, observability is the ability to ask a question about your system and have the data to provide the answer to that question. And how do you go about doing that? Well, you wind up taking all your various observability sources, metrics, logs, traces. You put them in a big data lake, and then you go fishing. Hey, do we have any 503s? No, good. How long does it take us to log into our, how long does our login page take to load? Hey, we got some timing numbers. Did we have any 404s? Yes, and hey, there's the stack trace. You gather the information, and then you can do lots of things with it. You can create dashboards, you can create reports, you can create alerts. Often people create SLAs, SLOs, and SLIs around that. For those who don't know, aren't completely familiar with SLAs, SLOs, SLIs, and come on. I tend to think of an SLA as a contract. We need to have 3 nines of uptime or else. SLOs are your milestone. It's your milestone, 99.9% uptime. The SLI is where you are currently. We're currently at 99.1. Hey, we're still good. Now, observability has been helping testing since pretty much for as long as it's been in around. It is information. You can use that information to understand how your system works, what sections of your application are heavily loaded, what sections are not loaded. You can use that to guide where you need to focus your testing. It's also information about how the test worked. If you're not testing something of, hey, our login page loaded and there's a green login button, you don't need observability of that. But if you're testing, hey, our application has a button that restarts the application, and when you click that button, all the back-end jobs need to finish out their jobs and then shut down, and the back-end servers need to shut down, and the front-end servers need to shut down, and they spin back up in this order. Observability gives you that information of, did that happen in the correct path? It also gives you information of what went wrong. Hey, I just loaded a 404 on my web page. Your observability's got the stack trace and the other information that you can use to figure out what went wrong. Testing can also help observability. Observability is great at detecting, hey, something happened in the system, and give you some information about what happened technically. But, hey, my search page is loading 2 seconds slower than it used to. Is that because the release we just deployed changed something that caused the search page to load slower? Is that because we're an e-commerce site and we just took on a new vendor which doubled our inventory? Or did our customer change some parameters on their search page, which meant they used to only be pulling a small subset of our products, and now they're pulling the entire thing? You don't necessarily know based off of the information that observability gives you. If you can feed your test scripts in, that removes a lot of the variables. You know precisely what data your scripts are dealing with. You know precisely what workflows your test scripts are doing. This is, of course, assuming you're not dealing with dynamic test scripts built to deal with dynamic data, but that's a completely separate issue. It also opens up the door for the thing I find most interesting is, what do your customers really care about? Particularly, and at this point I'm talking about things with the UI. They don't really care that this page, your search page loads in 2 seconds or your login page loads in half a second. They care that they log in, they go through 4 steps to get to that search page and are able to do what they need to do. If you push out a patch that reduces the time to load your search page by 2 seconds, but it adds 1.5 seconds to 2 of those intermediary steps, those 4 intermediary steps to get to that search page, that user's experience has actually gotten worse, even though you've made the search better. So, if you can start feeding some of this information, you can start wrapping SLAs, SLOs, SLIs around the things your customers really care about, their workflows. Your test scripts, you can mimic the user's workflow in your test scripts and feed that information into observability. Now on to the fun part of this exercise, the demo. I've created a simple repository up on GitLab. Gee, surprise, it's open to the public. Anyone can go look at it. Where's my mouse? And here's the code that I'm going to be showing you. Tiny. I'm going to blow this up. Let me actually step back for a sec. Go back here. I'm losing my mouse. There it is. For this scenario, I'm just actually using a simple Selenium script, feeding information into Sumo Logic, just because it was fast and it was easy. Yeah, let me get it logged in and then I will. So I'll start with the outside in. This is a dashboard that and it is zooming it back in whenever I zoom it out. This is data that I've fed in using what I'm going to be showing you in the script in just a minute over the past couple days as I've been working through the application. So I've been able to fairly easily just graph the lines of the data points that I'm gathering, displaying it in a numerical fashion, not the most complex or overly intelligent graph, but just showing that the data is there, it's accessible, you can mine it. If I had it in the actual production one, I could then correlate it to, I've got this nice little jaggy section here, which the performance tester in me really wants to go diving into. But I could map that to, how the servers were functioning at that time. Create a query that cross-tabs that all together. And it's actually pretty simple and straightforward on how this works. I just simply created an HTTP collector in Sumo Logic that I just pushed, gave me a URL, I just pushed the information up to it. There are lots of other ways to deal with collectors. Henrik will probably regale me no end, but like I said, quick and easy. And when I start showing you my code, I will admit that. My coding technique is I make the simplest thing that works, and then I make it faster, better, more efficient. This is definitely still in the it makes it work phase. So this is the script that runs that data. It quite simply just logs into a URL, loads a couple subpages, and is done. And it can run, it runs pretty quickly. I've got it written in Ruby using Capybara and Selenium. And that was me just doing RSpec. And it will launch and run here for a couple seconds. Of course, it's putting the screen on the other page, so you guys don't get to see my blog post. But there it ran, and it took 17 seconds. Now, of course, the next time I run it, it will take a lot shorter just because the cache has been. See if I can type what. Now, how do I implement that? By quite simply including a library that I wrote, which I will dive into in a moment. If I had access to it when I figured this out, I would have. But I just create a simple logger tool. In the Sumo Logger, I've got basically a total of 4 methods. First one is start, which starts a timing data point. Yes, I am. Thank you. And then I can end the data point. Oops. Let's then push. And then I have a simple method that pushes the data up to Sumo Logic. I can save it. I can run the test again, which will run significantly faster. Should run in about 7 seconds now. As you can see, I've been doing it a fair bit. Yep, 8 seconds. Now it just pushed the data point up to Sumo Logic. Now, the performance tester in me, of course, is not satisfied with just pushing one data point. So, and I'm going to save you guys watching me mangle typing. So, I've got basically every single step instrumented. And once again, I can run it, and it'll take a few tenths of a second longer to push the data up into Sumo Logic. Yes. Actually, it was even a little faster. What does the logger do? He said it only has 4 methods. The initialize is what's called, in Ruby world, initialize is what's called when you create a new instance of an object, which basically just creates a hash. And I'm pushing the values into the hash, and then when it's time to push them up to Sumo Logic, I just read them out of the hash, and up it goes. So here's the start method, which, being a tester, I added an error state that if you try to start an action that already exists, I give you an error. But then it just sort of saves the timestamp, and end has a similar error of you're ending something that doesn't exist. I capture the end time. Pushing up. Here I'm rattling through all of the data points that I captured, putting them into a JSON object to push up to Sumo Logic, and just simply use NetHTTP to push it up. So pretty simple code, and you can just instrument any test you have with that sort of methodology to get data up. And certainly, like Henrik said, you can probably use OpenTelemetry or some other tools as well to instrument it. Now, some gotchas I've found while going through this process. As you saw, I captured everything in metrics because, gee, I'm a performance tester. But you don't necessarily always want to capture everything. You're going to be adding data to your data lake. And data lakes cost money based off of how much data you got in there. And also it can make it harder to find the information because you have more information. So think about what information you need to capture. In my case, I'm just capturing timestamps and the actions. Well, is it valuable to add an extra parameter so you can filter by, hey, this is my login test versus my search test? Or is having the amount of data transferred something that's useful? You can just push data in based off of what's needed, but think about what you're pushing in. Make sure you're pushing in what you really need. Second thing is, make sure that you have a way to separate, if you're pushing into the same data lake as your production observability, make sure you have a way to separate your test data from your production data. Because you don't want your SREs and your devs making decisions about how your application needs to be stood up or scaled out based off of your test scripts. So you want to make sure you can pull that out, particularly. Third item, how often do you run? Yeah, it'd be great to run it every 5 minutes. You get all sorts of useful data, but you're adding load to your system. You could be triggering backend processes to run that normally would only run once a day. You might wind up causing them to run more frequently. You don't necessarily want to do that. So you need to take these considerations into concern when you're adding this sort of instrumentation to your test scripts. Any questions?
Okay, so continuing with the Q&A, does anyone have a first question for Andy?
Don't be shy.
There we go.
It's just about the library that you use. I was thinking, because they remind me of a project that was done in Selenium, where you can modify the core functions of Selenium, where those libraries and way of instrumented will be automatically applied every time you do, I don't know, click or whatever you want to do in your scripts. So we could then enable that more easier to the users What do you think about that approach? Or would you think it makes more sense to let the tester says, I only want to send these details because otherwise I will have too much data to deal out of my test?
That was actually a debate that I was having at my last employer, the one Eric was mentioning earlier, where they have a lot of built-in frameworks. They actually have about 4 or 6 different test frameworks that they're using. And we were having a discussion about, okay, how do we best implement this? Do we build this as a add-on that you can just run there, or do we bake it into some of the, they've got a method for login where they just pass in the username and password. Do we bake it into the sub thing so people don't even see, which would certainly make a lot cleaner code. And that sort of goes back to the question of make sure you capture the data you're really interested in. There's some things that I could see like login where it would make sense to just bake it in. But it might also make sense to have the ability to push in an extra data point of, hey, particularly when you go to the thing of thinking about workflows, you can't necessarily predict what the flow is. So it's probably worthwhile having a separate method. So, hey, I want to track login through doing a search on the application, capture that as one big data point, that I want to then wrap an SLO or an SLA around to prove to my big customer that their workflow hasn't been damaged. So having both ways is probably good, taking into account what information is really useful for me to capture.
So I have a yellow topic. I was thinking, because in OpenTelemetry, you have the ability to inject a package. So it's like, instead of doing the way you were doing, to inject on every request that you're dealing the HTTP headers.
Mm-hmm.
And then if of course, the application is instrumented, then this notion of running these tests, this requirement, whatever, I mean, all the details related to test will be then available in the observability solution. So then you can also query and say, hey, give me only the telemetry data related to my tests,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. So that could be a way also maybe of
Yeah.
improving what you were showing us to us.
That would improve too. And that was actually, I was having a discussion my last year at my last company. I was actually in the SRE team that was implementing OpenTelemetry, and we were discussing doing exactly that. Which I think is definitely good and definitely valuable. It does go back to the question of, okay, it detected a change. What changed to make that change happen? Did the data model change? Did the, what search criteria they're putting in change? If you're only relying on the end user's interactions, what the end user is doing will affect the results. So I think that's definitely valuable. I mean, certainly that would be very great for when you're trying to figure out, okay, how are the end users using the application so I can inform my testing. That definitely gives you the good information on that front.
I have a question. I don't know. I don't know this tool, but the question is: when a test failed, does it tell you exactly why it failed?
It would depend upon. You would have to. Certainly, the way I scripted it there. No, if the test failed midway, you're not pushing.
Yeah,
the data.
definitely.
You could add an after hook that would run whether it passed or failed and push up whatever data existed.
And it will be shown in the later on the tool.
Yeah.
Ah, okay, got it.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Anyone?
I have a question. What do you have any recommendation on how to decide which metrics? Because you mentioned data lakes are expensive, so we have to be careful about the metrics that we decide to store. Any recommendation on how to choose them?
carefully. Like I said, at this point, the perf tester in me is going, capture everything, capture everything, capture everything. I would start by, certainly taking a look at, do you have, some of the things that Henrik was mentioning about, adding the tags to your headers. What information do you gain that you can mine out of what your end users are doing, and look for gaps, and then start filling in those gaps.
Okay, first of all, thank you, because this is a topic that I had an argument with my team because they thought that this is a bad practice in some ways. So basically, my question is, how can I actually argue with my team in order to say, okay, no, this is not a bad practice. We can actually do it. And that's it, because I don't know, for me, it was not an easy thing to argue with them because they said, no, that is not possible. Maybe, I don't know, they had their reason, but that's it.
The way I've approached it in the past is adding value, trying to add value. Been mentioned before, everybody talks about pushing left. Well, you can push right as well. How can you as a tester help the ops people? Giving them more information that might not be as readily visible. Giving your teams information, like I said, your customers worry about their workflows. They don't worry about how your application is doing. Oh, gee, my application isn't loading correctly. Well, maybe their servers are, I haven't seen a single person say, well, maybe their servers are backlogged and I just need to wait a little bit. No, they'll jump to something else. Bring that perspective in, try to bring that perspective in, and be a champion for it. I know I'm not giving you great advice, but.
No, it's okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else? Any takers? I don't think so. So, in that case, thank you so much, Andy, for joining us today.